Welcome.
Well, welcome everyone. As Jason just announced, we're recording here and we're right at 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, just wanted to let you know there's a chat window in this webinar, so if you have questions, please feel free to send them directly to myself or to the group, and we'll get those to the presenter. We'll have some opportunity for those questions to be asked to the presenter by the end of the webinar, and maybe we'll see if there's a good point to ask any questions partway through. Also, if you would prefer to ask questions yourself, we will open that up for you to unmute yourself and ask questions at the end. And also feel free to adjust the screen for your viewing convenience. If you toggle anything and adjust anything, that only adjusts your view, so you don't have to worry about that changing things for us. If you're new to the webinar series, or if you've been here before, we hold these webinars once a month on the first Thursday at 11 o'clock. And I'm looking forward to the presentation from Jackie, because our organization here at the University of Montana is going through some growth, and we are dealing with some of these same questions about corporate culture. So unless anyone has any questions to get started here, we will turn it over to Jackie and hear what she has to share with us. Jackie?
Thanks, Jen. Well, welcome everybody. Much like a DIY home reno show, this webinar may make culture building look quick and easy, but it's not. So hopefully we'll have some takeaways for you today for going back to your organizations and having some ideas about next steps and what to do. I'm not going to belabor my bio slide here, but I want to just jump in with you today and just kick it off by the quote, as you probably have heard this one before: culture eats strategy for breakfast. So there was a recent combination of groundbreaking work by leading scholars, and they there's generally accepted attributes that are identified with culture. The first one is shared. So by nature, it's a group phenomenon. It cannot be done solo with a single person, and it's not just an average of individual characteristics. It really lives within those shared behaviors, values, the most commonly experiences through the norms and the expectations of the group. And so, in other words, we'd be looking at the unwritten rules of the organization. It's also pervasive. So it permeates multiple levels and applies really broadly throughout the organization. And sometimes it's even fused within the organization. So it manifests itself with the collective behaviors, the group rituals, the visible symbols, the stories, and the legends. And we don't want to forget that. We don't want to forget the stories. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. It's enduring, so it happens over the long term, and it develops through critical events in that collective life and the learning of the group. And people are drawn to organizations with characteristics similar to their own. And, you always talk about what's their fit within the team. And that's really true. And the fit is really critical for the team. And we have natural attrition sometimes because the individual doesn't find that fit for themselves either. And then it's implicit. So it's kind of a silent language, right? People are effectively hardwired to recognize and respond to culture instinctively. So those are some interesting factors for culture, and it really is going to overshadow strategy by far. It's going to make or break our organizations, as we well know. So here's the dictionary version of culture defined. It's beliefs, it's values, customs. As I mentioned, it's also the written and unwritten rules. It's how we conduct business and how we treat our employees, how we treat our customers and our community. How much freedom is given in personal expression and new ideas and decision making, and how does information and power flow through the organization. And finally, how committed employees are to organizational objectives. So those are some real big concepts that we're going to focus on today. So who's your culture club? Who defines your organization's culture? Is it all of these groups? Is it our leadership and management with input from our HR folks, and absolutely with input from our employees themselves? What kind of culture do the employees want? And how are we going to define that? So there's ways that we can gain that input from everybody within the organization and help build these steps that we're going to look at today for creating and maintaining that culture. Here's one way of looking at the types of organizational culture. We can see that some cultures are clan-oriented or tribe-oriented. You hear that terminology a lot. So it's family-like. It has a focus on mentoring and nurturing. It's the doing things together type of culture. The adhocracy is a culture that's dynamic. It has entrepreneurs. It has a focus on risk-taking, innovation, in other words, doing things first. Then there's the market culture. That has a focus on the competition, on achievement and getting the job done. And then finally, the hierarchy. So that one is the structured and controlled type of culture that focuses on efficiency and stability and doing things right. So what culture do you want for your organization, and how might you move towards it in the future? Where are you now as a culture? Are you in that top half with the flexibility and freedom to act, or are you in the bottom half, which is more conservative, right? Doing things right, getting the job done, or are we on that a top half of it? So here's another way to describe it too, and I really was intrigued with this, the 5 types of company culture and how to describe it. So one might be the team first, or the comrade concept. It makes employee engagement at the top priority. There's frequent outings, there's flexibility to accommodate employees' family lives. These are some common markers of the team first corporate culture. And so these types of companies are going to hire for culture fit first and skills and experience second. They know that by doing that, they'll likely have employees that are satisfied with their work and eager to show their gratitude by going the extra mile for the customer. Now, there can be some pitfalls with the teams first type of culture. The larger the company, the more difficult it is to maintain this type of culture. That's why having a team member dedicated to cultivating culture is a great strategy for any company, especially in these larger ones. So you might have a team first culture if employees are friends with people in other departments, your team regularly socializes outside of work, you receive thoughtful feedback from employees in surveys, and people take pride in their workstations. The second one is the elite corporate culture, or the athlete. These cultures hire only the best because it's always pushing the envelope, and they need employees not just to keep up, but to lead the way. They hire confident, capable, and competitive candidates, and you think fast growth and big splashes in the market. So these types of cultures are out to change the world by untested means. What could be some of the pitfalls for this type of culture? This kind of intensity can lead to competition between employees and people feeling pressure to always be on their A game. Perks like team outings, peer recognition programs, and health initiatives can help counteract this. So you might have an elite culture if employees aren't afraid to question things that could be improved. They're outspoken, they can lay things on the table and have that common thread and that safe zone. Employees make work their top priority. They work long hours. Your top talent moves up the ranks very quickly, and you may have many highly qualified job applicants to choose from, maybe. With the lowest unemployment record in the state, per the governor on a newscast that I heard just last night, the applicant pool might not be quite that large right now for us. The third one, the horizontal corporate culture, that's the free spirit. So titles don't mean much in the horizontal cultures. And this is the kind of culture that's common in startups because it makes for kind of that collaborative, everybody pitch in mindset. In this kind of company, the executives work side by side with junior staff. It typically, in that kind of communication, happens through conversations across the desks rather than emails or memos. So this is the experimental phase where risks are necessary and every hire has to count. Some possible pitfalls with this type. The horizontal culture can suffer from a lack of direction and accountability. So we want to try to encourage collaboration while still maintaining that clearly defined goals and a knowledge of who's going to spearhead that. And it shouldn't mean just no structure if we have that horizontal culture. So you might have this kind of culture if teammates discuss those new product ideas in the break room, everybody does a little bit of everything, the CEO makes his or her own coffee, and you still have to prove your product's worth to critics. And number 4, you can see the conventional or the traditionalist culture. They have clearly defined hierarchies and still grappling with the learning curve for communicating through new mediums. This is where the tie or slacks are expected. In fact, any dress code at all is indicative of more of a traditional culture. The companies in recent years have had a major shift in how they operate, though. Traditional companies, because they still have those clearly defined hierarchies, are grappling, with those lines, communicating through new mediums that can blur those lines. So there is a big opportunity for learning and growth within these organizations as long as we don't resist it. We need to embrace the new technologies and really use those as our tools. So what are the pitfalls? It's a really cut and dry approach. It leaves little room for inspiration and experimentation, as you could well imagine. And it can result in just lack, just a, kind of a milquetoast type of response from employees, or maybe even some resentment for being micromanaged. So getting employees to understand the larger mission and putting more trust in employees to work toward it can counteract that. So you might have a conventional culture if there's strict guidelines for most departments and roles, if people in different departments generally don't interact, if the major decisions are left up to the CEO, and if your company corners the market. And then the 5th one, the progressive culture, the nomad culture, that's where uncertainty is the definitive trait of a transitional culture. So mergers, acquisitions, sudden changes in the market can all kind of contribute to this type of a culture. And because employees often don't know what to expect, that uncertainty is really that main trait. It's not all doom and gloom, though. You can treat this major transition as a chance to clarify companies' new goals or missions and answer employees' pressing questions. Some possible pitfalls with this is that this kind of culture can instill fear in employees. Any change in management or ownership, even if it's a good thing for the company, isn't always seen as good. So communication, pipelines, really crucial in easing this fear. And it's also a good chance to hear feedback and concerns from employees to help keep your top talent engaged. So you might have a progressive culture if your employees talk openly about the competition and possible buyouts. Your company has a high turnover rate. Remember, it's the nomad mentality. Most of your funds come from advertisers, grants, or donations, and changes in the markets are impacting your revenue. So which one describes your company? And you may be thinking, oh my gosh, we kind of have, a combination of a couple of these things going on. But just remember, if something doesn't align with your company's goals, then leave it, right? Take the elements of each of these that work best for your company. And it isn't culture isn't just passive. With effort, we can modify it to suit our team. So I just thought those were really interesting concepts and a good way to describe different kinds of culture. So cultivating that, there's some pillars that we can live by. Being intentional and transparent. I think having that transparency is so key, where we can be transparent. And obviously, a lot of you probably already know, in leadership, there's things that are developing. We're discussing it. We're trying to get to a point where we can implement things. We've already been in that flow with it, but we haven't necessarily rolled it out to our employees yet. So having that transparency as best we can and sharing those things with our employees when it's appropriate time to share with them helps them to process through those changes too, and helps them get ready for it. Give employees a purpose beyond profit, right? It's not always about the money that helps retain and engage our employees. There are other things that employees will stay with us for. It's not always about the money. Now, they always like the money. We as an employee, I always like it too. But there's something beyond that that glues us together. Absolutely, we have to champion equality for all. We've got lots of inclusion items that have come up through the ranks this last year or two, and we absolutely have to be inclusive. And then focusing on well-being. This has been particularly true for employees as we're moving through the pandemic stuff, providing work-life balance, providing opportunities for remote work when it's necessary, or if we can even offer that, depending on the nature of the job. And also providing some mental health and wellness resources for our employees, because we're under different stressors and pressure and so forth. Just making it about humanity, putting our people first. So we want to cultivate and grow that. Any culture is going to grow however we drive it. It can grow in negative ways, or it can grow in positive ways. So how do we grow that in a positive bent? I also thought that this was a really good slide to talk about why should anybody work here? What is the dream? Building dreams. And these items are really fascinating to me. Let people be themselves. Again, the diversity piece, the inclusion piece. Radical honesty, communicate what's really going on, and that goes back to that transparency thing that I just mentioned. Extra value, magnifying people's strengths. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And then being authentic. Stand up for something that's real. Create that satisfying work. And then just don't make it more complicated than it has to be, right? Keep it as simple as we can. The larger the organization, the more complex it has to be. I get that. But bottom line with this, creating that authentic organization is really a tough task. And so there's some critical success factors that we want to identify. And one is the support from the top. So this is the first critical success factor, getting that resilient support of top management. They need to be engaged and convinced of the benefits of building that organization, and emotionally committed to the long-term nature of sustaining the organization. Driven to perform. This is clearly another critical success factor in this element of dreams that we're looking at here. It's also impossible to work on all of this at once. So where do we need to start? We need to possibly, for instance, pursue radical honesty when we're confronted with a culture that's characterized by gossip, rumor, and negative networks. These can sadly be found in the larger organizations, but believe me, it happens in small ones as well. So we want to pursue that if that's some of the negative growth that we're seeing in our organizations. So take one of these acronyms and see where that might fit in as a place to start for you. Whoops, I'm going to go back to this. So my last point is that extra value that you see up here. And so you want to address extra value when you start experiencing two possible symptoms. The first is when the company has trouble retaining its best people. When your best people leave, they know the value they add is greater than the value the organization adds to them. And we know it, the tight labor market is really a vital issue. The second sign that an injection of extra value is needed is low mobility within the organization. People get stuck in their jobs. So even in a small company, we can counteract that lack of mobility within the organization. Some small changes can have a big effect. For instance, cross-training on things. If that particular individual has been doing the same thing for 10 years, offer some cross-training opportunities. That's going to build your bench too for unexpected absences for people, and being able to step into that role if somebody is unexpectedly gone from work. And then just finally, I want to mention with authenticity, it's not really achieved through fancy catchphrases, but rather connection with the past and clarity and continuity of purpose, along with that exemplary leadership. Just bottom line here, you might begin with simple rules when the organization seems to be shrouded in a web of complexity. Just shave it down and make it a little simpler, and see how that might affect that positivity within your organization. So what isn't organizational culture? Well, let's be clear. These things are not company culture. The Secret Santa gift exchanges, karaoke nights, beanbag chairs, Nerf gun fights, catered lunches, cruises with your coworkers. Wow, that's a big one. Mashed potato sculpting contest. So these are fun things for people who work together. They might indicate a certain type of workplace environment, and it might even stem from the culture that's been created, but it's not the company culture. Just like these questions aren't effective or useful in determining culture fit. Questions like, what's your favorite movie? Do you rock climb, play the cello, enjoy film noir? Which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? Things like that. We want to create culture based on those values, beliefs, commitment. All of those are going to play into it. But we still have to have fun when we're at work, and they definitely have fun at the office. So I think we're getting close to halfway through the presentation. Are there any questions on the board, Jen?
There was just one question about the slide deck and being distributed, and we will have that posted online after the event. It's a very good question, because I'm taking notes furiously, and I know I would be happy to have social stuff later.
Absolutely. And thank you, because I was going to mention that at the beginning of the presentation. The slide deck will be available. I can even post a couple of additional resources that I'm mentioning just as in this next slide with the 9 keys to driving cultural change. So if people want those extra documents for guidance as well, I can provide those too.
I do have one question myself, and I can share that, and then please feel free to answer or save it to the end. But I'm wondering, what of these items are critical to keep in mind with an expanding team?
Items to keep in mind for expanding teams. So I think that, you're really, one of the biggest things is that open communication pipeline. A lot of times that communication gets lost as the team gets bigger, those dynamics start to change, right? Maybe we've been more of a family-oriented, tight-knit group, everybody can almost read each other's minds, and now we have new people coming into the group and the team, and we want to help them to feel like they belong within the team. And so that communication pipeline, and being able to follow up with them, and this is where your folks that have that HR role within your organizations and the direct supervisor will overlap and help with that onboarding process with the new folks too, right? And with onboarding, that's a perfect time to introduce and integrate them into the culture. And then repetition. We just need to be repetitious with it. We need to be visible with it. One of the things that they do recommend is, oh golly, I was just reading about it this morning. Yeah, repeating the message. For instance, starting every meeting, talking about how we're progressing with our culture, how things are changing for the better. Here's some things that we may have tried that didn't work so well, and so we changed gears and we've started a new initiative, and what's the progress that we're making on that. So starting those staff meetings with just a little bit of a blurb about the culture piece itself, I think is really helpful. Just being really relentless with that follow-up. So hopefully that kind of helps answer your question with the expanding team, right?
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we don't want someone to feel like they're in the outfield somewhere and not keeping in the know with what's going on, right? So with these 9 keys to driving cultural change, like I mentioned, the hardest part of the business is transformation, is changing the culture, changing that mindset and the instincts of the people within the company. So that clear definition, fully explain, what we're all about here within our company. The over communication, like I mentioned, the leaders need to embrace that new culture by showing through actions and words and behaviors that they're embracing that too. Anything less or a lack of commitment to that change. So relentless follow-up, like I said, when you're walking around, managing by walking around, clarify and confirm with employees the understanding of the new direction that we're going, what we're trying to build, and then create conditions to align with the culture. If teamwork is the theme, then rearrange the office to induce that teamwork. If safety is the theme, then spend the money to make the physical conditions in the office or the factory or the vehicle safe. So align those incentives to match the culture. And we want to share the good and the bad examples, so we can share the success stories, but also where did things not go quite so good, and what did we do to resolve that so that we don't keep repeating those same mistakes. Involve the individual. Ken Blanchard said it pretty good. He said, people often resent change when they don't have any involvement on how it should be implemented. So contrary to popular belief, people don't resist change, they resist being controlled. So having that input from our peeps is really, really important too in driving that cultural change. Maybe you'd like to get an employee opinion survey launched and have that survey focused on cultural questions and getting that feedback from folks. Accountability, obviously there needs to be accountability. So again, we're living by these values and these beliefs. This is what this is why we're here. And those that don't want to align themselves with it, you'll probably see some natural attrition from that. And then patience and persistence. Like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. We want to have that ongoing forward momentum down the path that we're wanting to create and trying to build. So again, not getting impatient with it. So I'd kind of like to walk you through a couple of steps in creating that organization's culture, and I'm coming to an agreement on the culture that we're creating. So what kind of behaviors are we looking for? Which ones are we going to support? Which kind of behaviors are we looking to change? And then where do our beliefs and values hinder those behaviors? Where do they promote and reinforce those behaviors? And I think that's where, when we're asking ourselves those questions, is where getting that feedback from employees is really key. In creating that employee opinion survey, they can send in their input either anonymously or identify who they are. And so some of the beliefs and values, right, that we would be looking at probably is, have empowerment. If they own it, the culture will thrive. Creating a respectful workplace, caring about each other, living it. Are we going to live our beliefs and values? Like I mentioned before, being inclusive as well. Those can be some of the things that we can help establish through our organization. It's really interesting when I go into some organizations and we're doing training on a variety of things, and that can all flow back into what are your core values, what's your mission statement, and when I ask people that, a lot of times employees don't know. They don't know what that mission statement is. They don't know what the core values are because we don't get it in front of them on a regular basis and have it be visible. It's put in the handbook and they sign off on it when they're hired and they never see it again. So I think it's super, super important to, if we're going to have those, let's highlight those. Let's get them visible in front of the employees as much as we can, right? And defining those, what's really important, right? Dreaming big versus feasibility. What's practical for us, even though we want to have that innovation and those big dreams and those aspirations. How can we chunk that down into doable goals? And then grouping together those related values. Like I said, what would those values look like? And then once we do that, then every employee knows it verbatim and we start living it, right? We can't thrive if we don't know the rules. It just becomes a lawless society. So if everybody's on equal footing, and even if an executive or a leader breaks a core value, anybody can call them out. So it's really not built on hierarchy, but built on behavior that's a way of life. And you hear about all of these, large companies with their culture building and the things that they do within their workplaces. But what is right for your organization? Golly, I go into a lot of different organizations. We do HR support for about 1,000 companies. And it's so fascinating to me to see the different culture things. One organization, encourages people to bring their dogs to work, right? And another organization, not so much about the 8 to 5 work day, but working when people are at their peak productivity time, right? Flexing out those hours. There's just a ton of different things. And part of what builds our culture too is giving employees what they want. And we're seeing more and more of the personalized perks coming forward. More work-life balance, more investment in people's health and well-being to be able to grow that culture. So think about some of the things that you guys might do that's kind of unique and would help draw or attract people in to your organization because of those. What does it look like day to day, right? What are the accepted behaviors? you know, that culture of appreciation draws people into the flow, right? Having that common story, like I mentioned before, is really key too. So if we have a widely known story that we're trying to achieve, maybe it's a story about our products or our services or our customers. People always like to have a story. And outlining that and how every employee brings that story to life creates that authenticity that we mentioned before. The other thing that we might want to do, well, obviously, I'll walk you through the next couple steps, but I want to definitely mention one thing that is really effective too for company culture. Changes make the biggest impact. You know, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for behaviors to become habits. Recognizing the positive, making those changes incremental so that it's easier to start implementing on the individual basis, and having some of those perks or those rewards that people can see right away. Recognizing that, and that takes effort on everybody's part. Like, you know, everybody has permission to recognize positive behavior towards our culture goals and so forth, and rewarding. If you're a coworker, having that permission to reward another coworker, or vice versa, right? The worker bees can even reward the leaders if they see some positive stuff going on, right? So make it fun and interesting and easy and simple for them. And then maintaining our culture, you know, we need to be inclusive, that's a given. Everybody held to the same standards, being the example of what we expect. It's not just in the talk about it, it's in the actions, rewarding those behaviors and connecting those behaviors with results, right? So those are big deals in the organization. So if you kind of want to see where company culture comes into play and some of these steps that I've just mentioned to you, take a look at a couple of websites like Southwest Airlines website and how they transmit that company culture onto their website. They talk about things like the warrior spirit. What are their core values and so forth. They have it, you know, listed right on their website. They have videos of what it's like to work at Southwest Airlines, and they'll highlight different departments or individuals within those departments and things that they're doing in the organization. And we all know that online presence, you know, that social media, that ease of just being able to Google your company and bring up, you know, some really dynamic pieces of what your company is and what you're doing and what your people are doing there, and just make it about the humanity. Absolutely make it about the humanity, right? And then also that culture of appreciation draws people into being able to sustain that excellence. When we get a clear focus on appreciating employees and that are driving the results that we want to see, or significant improvements, then you know, we're going to be building that forward momentum. When appreciation is missing, we just cannot reach our full potential. So what's valued gets done and creates those opportunities. It's going to accelerate that success for us, for sure. So with that, I'm probably wrapping up a little bit early for our session today, but wanted to open it up to other questions from the audience.
Thank you, Jackie. Please feel free to unmute if you'd like to ask Jackie some questions directly, or again, put them in the chat and we can get those to Jackie and see what expertise she can share.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, culture is going to tie to employee retention and so forth for us. And I think we're all kind of looking for that silver bullet, like what is going to be, that magic bullet that's going to help us keep employees. But I think in some ways, we need to be prepared for a more fluid employee population. People are making some choices and some decisions to change jobs and looking for what is it that's most important to them right now. With being hit with, what if, health issues, family issues, all of these things that have contributed to, this flow with employees in and out of our organizations. Instead of resisting that, I think to be successful in today's world as employers, we need to be, resilient and flexible with that too. And just knowing that people are going to make those decisions for good reasons too, and leave on good terms, but being able then to readjust to that, being ready to onboard folks, really train them properly, integrate them into our culture from the get-go. When we're doing orientations and so forth for folks, don't leave them alone. Give them a buddy to hang out with. Help them to learn the unwritten rules. Have a good representative of that buddy system that can take them through and show them the ropes. And it's not just, fill out the paperwork and sign off on the handbook and, all of that kind of stuff. The main focus is to let them know, hey, this is what our company is all about. We want you to meet everybody. We want to take you on a tour and introduce you. Everybody from the top down, right? Sure.
I've got a question here about how formalized does the onboarding process need to be?
So where the formalization comes in with onboarding is to have a deliberate format for it, and to know that to have a process where you're taking that new hire through a very deliberate process and focused process, where the handoff is there. Say we start with HR and they do the orientation piece. We're building in culture there as well, handing that new hire off to the supervisor who does more of that, introductions to coworkers, touring the facility, helping them get set up at their workstation, answering questions for them, giving them a task or two right from the get-go. But honestly, onboarding isn't just a one-time event. The orientation piece is one time. The onboarding is it's going to involve several weeks, maybe even months for that onboarding piece. So just know that as you bring new people in, again, that repetition of the cultures and the values, check-ins with that new hire, progress meetings with them as they start learning the job and mastering the duties of the job and so forth. And it's not just the technical parts, but the interpersonal things that are happening. So think of onboarding as kind of an ongoing. I mean, onboarding can take 3 to 4 months. It could take 6 to 8 months for a complete onboarding, and you can have that formatted very deliberately so that you know that you're coming back to those checkpoints with that new person. We've got some great tools for that if anybody's interested in those onboarding pieces. You see my email up here, Jackie@aehr.org. Feel free to email me with those requests too, and I can get those sent out to you.
We've got another question here. Looking for advice on building a culture with remote workers.
So again, that's part of our work world today. So we want to make sure that remote worker is still included as if they were at the office, right? If there's team meetings, if there's even socially, speaking, if there is a gathering for, if somebody's having a birthday and you have a birthday celebration or something, invite them to participate in that on a virtual screen, right? So that they might not be there to eat the birthday cake with you, but they can socialize with the folks that are there as we're having kind of our gatherings. Also, the remote worker, making sure that they're accessible during those core work hours, because there's meetings that need to happen, right? And they can join virtually. Making sure that piece stays stable for them. Also to, what else was I going to mention with the remote worker? Making sure they have everything from their home station that they need to adequately communicate as well. The supervisor and the remote worker are going to need to collaborate and communicate a little bit more often and more clearly as to what that, what's the work calendar, what are the projects they're working on, where are they at with those, meeting deadlines, things like that. So maybe sharing calendars and project status would be a good way for that connection between the supervisor and the staff person that's working remotely. Does that kind of make sense? Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There's one other question here about whether or not you find value in assessment tools like StrengthsFinder or DISC or any of those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the tools that we use in a lot of our trainings is the DISC, personality profiles, building a team view report so that you see what the dynamics are of the whole team or the whole group, and having conversations around that, because once we understand where that other person is coming from and what their personality style is, then that communication opens up for us, and there's less chance of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and so forth, and that team then pulls tighter together. So absolutely, any kind of tool like that will help us understand where that other person's coming from, because we all grew up in different families, different backgrounds, different levels of education, different values and belief systems, and we all bring that into the workplace. and it is a melting pot. It's a true melting pot. And so being able to use a tool like that to help build your team culture is super cool too. Yeah, good comment.
Great. Well, it looks like we're kind of coming to the end of our questions here. Are there any last questions from participants? Anything else you want to get Jackie's input on here today?
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
I just wanted to say, Jason put a little note in the chat. There is a small typo on the last slide here. If you want to get a hold of Jackie, the website address is Associated Employers with an E in the middle there. There's the link. It is. And maybe we can get that refreshed slide before we post those online. We have one more question that came in. What type of culture works best with multi-generational workers?
So there's no correct or best culture. With that, again, it depends on the nature of your business and what you're trying to achieve, right? So when you look back at those 5 types of corporate culture, like the team first or the elite, if you're looking at multi-generational employees within the same organization, I would say the traditionalist or the conventional corporate culture probably isn't going to work well. That's the most hierarchical one that you're going to have. And the progressive one, the transitional one is that one is the least structured, and you might have some bumps with that. I would say if you are looking at multi-generational, you would probably want to look at more of a horizontal corporate culture, that free spirit one, okay? And the reason I say that is because we want to make sure that we're offering everything that we can for our younger workers. And that can involve, you know, moving them quickly through the organization to learn and to grow and advance. Like I mentioned, you don't want them getting stuck in a job and losing that ambition or that challenge. Also, allowing those platforms within the culture for self-expression, being involved with the changes, being able to offer their input for that, I think is huge for multi-generational, our younger workers. And being able to come full circle with them and let them know either, yeah, we're going to take your input and run with it, or we've modified it, we took parts of it, or you know what, we've considered it and it's, you know, it's still in the hopper, but we're just not going to do that right now. Like, come full circle, don't just leave them hanging out there. So probably that horizontal culture and that team first culture, those kinds of combos are going to work best with our multi-generational. Now, that's going to mean that maybe some of our baby boomer generation or traditionalist generation might need to learn some new things too. Remember when I talked about that conventional corporation, they've got some catching up to do to use new technology, to use new ways of doing things, to build that culture. And so we'll need to, as leaders, we're going to need to help reassure those folks too, and help bring them along with the group and embrace that piece of it. So.
Thanks. I see that Jason has his hand up. Jason, do you have a question?
Yeah, Jen, just as we come to a close, Jackie, I wanted to offer the opportunity, and knowing that we are recording this February 3rd of 2022, and of course people will be watching this, you know, hopefully indefinitely to a certain degree. But you guys do, Associated Employers is working with the Montana Department of Transportation to deliver some courses throughout the state. I know you've done one in Butte recently. Would you like to have the opportunity to promote some of those upcoming full-day courses?
Sure. We've got several locations coming up, and of course, each location can customize some of the focus of the training that we're doing with them. So we're offering, one is the HR Fast Track HR topics, and the other is Management Excellence topics. And that does include those DISC personality profiles with the Management Excellence ones. Those are full day trainings. Where's my schedule? Here we go. So those are coming out. The next ones will be next week, February 8th, I'll be in Lewistown. Then February 9th at Great Falls, that'll be Bethany presenting that one. I'm not sure about the mid-March ones, but March 23rd in Forsyth, and then March 25th in Miles City. I'll be presenting those two. So, and then if we do add others, I think we're looking at maybe Helena, maybe mid-March, but I don't have a date or specifics on that yet. Yes, so absolutely. Jump in and join us for those trainings if you'd like.
Great. Thank you so much for presenting today, Jackie.
You're welcome.
It looks like those are all the questions we have right now. Thanks for pointing out, Jason, that there are other opportunities to get some great information from Associated Employers. I just want to thank some of our partners here before we wrap up today. Always great to work with Montana State University Extension Center. Carrie is on the presentation today running our technology. They help post things online and keep things up to date for us. Also, Jason Nitschke and myself, I'm at the University of Montana. Jason is at Great Falls Development Authority, and we're both SBDC directors. So we work together with the Extension Center and Joel Schumacher to plan this series. And thanks to all of the attendees and also all of the presenters that we have across the year, our host organizations, the Montana Department of Commerce, the SBA, the MEDA, Economic Developers Association. So without those partners, we couldn't bring this presentation to you. So thanks for attending. We hope to see you next month. Keep your eyes peeled for details on what that presentation will be. We're planning something for women in business since it's Women's History Month, and you know, this is COVID year for you. So the two speakers that I had in mind both have had childcare issues due to COVID over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So the details will be forthcoming, but it will be the first Thursday next month, same time at 11 a.m. So hopefully we'll see you there or at another event further down the line. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.